So here it is. But yeah, it's got a mast that runs all the way down the length of it. And on the back, you'll see on the bottom here is a little like thing that I can tighten up, and it clamps down on the mast and this back track thingy, and it locks that in place, which is awesome. Um, Along the back, we've got the bottom leg here that extends down, and then this kind of kickstand piece with these like metal peg thingies, and those just kind of go in here. I wasn't really planning to use like metal pins, but that's literally just what I had lying around. If I had had dowels, I probably would have just used those. But the pins actually make it like really sturdy. It's really nice. And one of my favorite parts about the easel is actually a design constraint that I gave myself. The entire thing folds up and it becomes super compact. I'd seen other designs online, and I'll link to another tutorial that I saw, but in that tutorial, these front pieces came out in the front here, and there was more stuff that came out in the back. It's a much simpler design, so if you actually plan on making this, I highly recommend checking out that link in the description. But I knew that there must be some kind of way to make the entire thing super slim, and I'm so glad that I put the time into it because, yeah, this thing is amazing. The first section I worked on is the front kind of frame section. So, because I'm working with 2x2s, I figured that I would end up ripping them in half so that I got two thinner kinds of boards that I can use for most of the construction. And because I'm doing that, I can actually do a lot of the joinery while the 2x2 is one piece, and then rip it in half once all of that stuff is done, and hopefully I get identical pieces. So yeah, for this first piece I measure it out, and I start cutting the dados and the rabbets into it that I'm going to need to put that bottom piece in and the two braces. And this is a pretty repetitive process. It's just kind of measuring and marking where things are going to be, and then heading over to the table saw with, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a miter attachment, maybe? It goes into one of the tracks on the table saw, and then there's a fence that's attached to it, and I can just push pieces through, keeping them perpendicular to the blade. It's kind of scary. I don't really like using table saws, but we use what we have, I guess. Once the dado and the two rabbets were cut in, I moved on to drilling the hole for the first set of pins that the legs will hinge down on. So I kind of figured out where I wanted that to be, and I just headed over to my drill press and kind of just drilled it. I used a bit that was the exact same size as the metal rod that I have, and because I used something that's the same size, it lets me kind of get a good like friction fit, like press fit with the pin into the hole that I made. And for the actual leg pieces, I'll drill those oversized so that they kind of swing freely. And once that hole was drilled, I just ripped the whole thing in half on the table saw. This is also kind of scary to do, but after a couple of times, you kind of get used to it. You get a feel for the saw, and yeah, it's pretty reasonable to do. The saw blade leaves a little bit of a rough surface, so I do have to sand where those saw marks are after I've finished ripping it, but that's pretty straightforward to do, not a lot of work. Once I was done sanding, I could move on to making the cross pieces that would fit into the notches that I cut. And again, this was just kind of measuring and marking out a piece of wood, and then just ripping it through the table saw to a specific thickness. But yeah, once I had all those pieces, it was just a matter of gluing it all together. Now, luckily, me and my partner have been slowly building up our clamp collection over the years, And we do have some 90-degree clamps, which were super important for this, and an array of other clamps that just made this whole process possible. Okay, I've got the frame, the beginning of the frame, and here's the middle bar. It's gonna go in right there. And for the bottom, I took like that normal piece. Let's see. I had to cut one face flat, and then I had another chunk right here, and I glued them together. So that goes on right there. And that should give me the bottom lip so that canvases can rest on that. So I've got to glue up the rest of this. While that glue was drying, I moved on to work on the mast. And to do this, I needed to tilt my table saw blade to 45 degrees and make a couple angled rip cuts. And you kind of saw how this comes together when I showed you at the beginning of the video, but basically I'm making two angled pieces, I guess angled like this, and then I have one like trapezoid piece that will fit in between those two angled pieces, and then it's like having a track with something running in between. And yeah, getting those angled pieces was pretty straightforward. Once I had them, I just cleaned them up with some sandpaper and then went on to cut the actual mast itself. And for this, I had to do two angled cuts on the one piece so that I got that nice trapezoid shape. Now, the top bar for the mast is similar to that bottom ledge that I made. It's two separate pieces that are glued together, and this lets me actually glue the thinner piece onto the mast first, and then I drove some nails into it. And I don't really know if that's going to help or not, but I was thinking that that piece is basically like a giant lever, so it's really easy to get leverage on it and to like try to maybe twist it and break it. I'm hoping that the two nails that I drove in are going to help to resist those twisting forces. And since it's the two pieces, I can drive those nails in and then glue the other piece on top so that we don't see any nails underneath, which I thought was pretty nice. And that piece came out really sturdy. I'm really happy with the mast. I'm not worried about it being too fragile in any kind of way. And as for the rails, it was at this point that I kind of decided that I was going to screw them in instead of gluing them, which is a decision that I am so glad that I made. There were multiple times in the fitting process where it was so much more straightforward because I could unscrew the rails and remove them and figure out the rest of the like the legs and the kickstand folding in, and like just being able to troubleshoot all of that stuff and then just attach the rails at the end of the project. But yes, in order to do that, I kind of laid it out where the track pieces are going to end up, and then I just marked with a pencil where those locations were. Then I headed over to my drill press, drilled in the actual spots because I didn't want the wood to split when I added my screws. So I just made some pilot holes. And with the pilot holes in place, I could screw in the screws so that the tips of them are just sticking out of the wood a little bit. And then I could take those pieces and press them down into place where they're going to end up. And that, in turn, transferred the screw head locations to the actual frame. And with those marks transferred to the frame, I could head over to the drill press, again, just to make some pilot holes so that I don't split anything that I've worked on so far. Then I could just screw the whole thing together. And just like that, the main portion of the easel was done. I still need to do the clamping mechanism for the actual mast itself, but I'm not going to worry about that until the rest of the thing is built. So next I got to work on the actual leg segments, and these were the most annoying part to work on, mostly because I was stupid at multiple stages, and had to figure some things out and rebuild things. You'll see. But yes, we're using the same method that I did for the frame piece, where I start with a 2x2, cut a bunch of rabbits and dados and stuff into it while it's one solid piece, and then I rip it in half. And the first dado that I make is so that there's clearance for that middle bar in the frame when the whole thing is closed up. So I marked that out and then made that notch on the table saw. This is a much better view on it so you can actually see what's happening. And I'm basically just taking multiple cuts to clear out a bigger area. Editor Sophie here. First off, earrings. Next, I completely forgot two things. I had to drill out the holes for the pins so that the legs could hinge, and I had to cut two dados that would fit support braces. I forgot to mention that in my voiceover, so I'm gonna add it now. And it's very apparent now that the thing that I'm working on is not in the final product because I add these miters to that inside dado. I thought that it would be a little bit easier for everything to like fit together that way, and I thought that it would also look nice, which it did. It looked very nice. But yeah, I just did that with a miter box and a handsaw, and then I just used a palm sander to kind of blend everything together nicely. I also ended up rounding over the edges so that there was lots of clearance and no like pokey bits coming through on the like front of the easel, and just to make sure that everything would like glide smoothly and not catch on anything. And to do that on my chop saw, I just set it to an angle and like chopped off the two corners, and then with my palm sander I just went in and smoothed over all of the transitions and got a nice little rounded bit. And I ended up doing that on both sides. Next, I did one of the more challenging things on the project, which was making the notches that the kind of metal bits are going to hook into in the final product. And I didn't really know what I was doing the first time, but I just kind of went for it. And I basically just marked out a bunch of different spots. Initially, I did a spacing of 1.5 centimeters between centers of the holes. And then I just drilled those out. And once they were drilled out, I went over to the table saw and chopped out the space between the circle that I'd cut and the edge of the board. And like in theory, this was great, but my execution was kind of lacking. For one thing, when I went to drill out the holes, I wasn't super accurate, so the holes themselves were like not really in a straight line. Like it was mostly straight, but you could tell that some of them were like offset and it was kind of uneven. And when I went to the table saw to like chop out those other bits, I definitely was just kind of sloppy with that. I guess I just wasn't very experienced with it, and it showed. So when I went to start cleaning that section up, it became very apparent as well that my holes were much too close together because there just wasn't enough wood in between to like resist against forces, and it was just breaking apart really easily. Once it started to break, I didn't want to throw this piece out because I had a lot of time invested in it already. So I decided to just chunk out that whole messed up spot and just glue in another piece of wood and to just try it again. I wasn't too heartbroken about this. So far I'm doing pretty well, and I figure if I just have another go at this, I can do it a little bit better. And I did do it a little bit better. Once the glue was dry, I went through and I remarked the hole positions, but this time I did it with like 2 millimeter spacing. And having that like little bit of extra space in between all of the holes made the perfect difference, and everything just made more sense. And the biggest difference was that I set up a fence on my drill press, and this let my spacing be dead on for all of the holes. It just made sure that everything lined up perfectly, and yeah. So yes, with this new beautiful piece ready to go, I ripped it in half and then I checked it out on the actual frame, and that's when I realized that I put all of those beautiful notches on the wrong side. It was so stupid that I'd done all of this work twice on the wrong side of this stupid piece. And I remember thinking earlier in the process, I knew which side they had to be on, and like I thought about marking it, but I just didn't do it, and then I don't know what happened. Anyways, so very quickly off camera, I remade that piece, and when I remade it, I opted to change things up a bit. So for one thing, I didn't do those miters, because since the notches had to be on the same side, not having the miters meant that I got more gradations that I could work with. And yeah, this new piece, I'm super happy with it. It fits like a glove, and we're ready to assemble this side. So yeah, I cut some more cross pieces that will fit with the legs and started putting everything together. First, I had to press the pins into the frame. One of them was a lot looser than I was hoping for, so I could just push it in by hand. But the second one, which is stupidly not on camera, I ended up using a clamp and just having it like go in a little bit at first, then sticking the clamp on it and slowly clamping it together, and it just did a nice little press fit on that second one. Editor Sophie, again, I forgot to talk about making the pins, because you already saw earlier that I had like a big bar of metal. So to cut through it, I used a file first to make like a little groove, and then I took a hacksaw and it bit in the groove pretty easily, and then I could just hacksaw it, which sucks. It takes forever, it's hard on my arms, but whatever, I got through it eventually, and I had to make 6 pins, I think? 2, 4, 6. Yeah, 6 altogether. Once the pins were in, I could fit the legs, and with the legs in place, I could start gluing in the cross braces. Next up, we have to do the kickstand. And for that to be properly positioned, I ended up gluing 2 blocks into the topmost portion of the frame, and they've got holes drilled in them for pins as well. Making the 2 long sections of the kickstand is very similar to the way that it was with the frame and with the legs. Started with 1 2x2, did all of my dado cuts, and drilled all my pins and rounded everything over while it was all one big piece, and then I split it in half. For this one, I've got 2 dados that will fit cross pieces, and I've got 2 dados that are there to sandwich into the cross pieces of the legs, which you'll see when this all folds together. And in order to make sure that I was making everything actually line up, I didn't do any measuring because I'm very bad with measuring like that. I assembled, I partially assembled the kickstand onto the frame, and I just lay it down and see where everything was lining up and touching and crossing, and I'd mark the spots with pencil and double check everything, and then make my cuts and just kind of slowly work it all together. I'm not showing it in the video here, but there are multiple times where I'd cut the main notch, go to fit it in, and it wouldn't fit quite right, so I'd take just a little bit more off and just kind of sneak up on the dimensions that I needed. And that worked like a charm. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, fitting this was very fiddly. I did end up attaching it, and not permanently attaching it, like just kind of fitting it and then like taking it apart and sanding things so that they were more rounded at the edges and like all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of just kind of fitting and finagling, but eventually it all came together, and I just like I love good design. I love when that whole process pays off because I like laid it flat and it all just like folded together. So perfect. I'd seen a design for this that was a lot chunkier. I'd seen several designs actually that were just like a lot bigger because the pieces weren't like nested into each other. And yeah, I was just like, oh, it'd be so cool if I could make it all fit into like one thin section. And to see it actually work was so good. I love that. But yeah, we're almost done. I just have to do the clamping mechanism for the mast now. And for that, I'm using a collection of hardware. I got all of this stuff at my local Home Depot. It's a threaded insert and a bolt. And is it a bolt? I don't know, you can tell me. I think it's a bolt. And a like plastic turny cap thing that fits the bolt head. I don't know, whatever it is. So yeah, you put the cap, the handle thingy onto the bolt, and then the bolt fits into the threaded insert, and the threaded insert fits into a piece of wood. So to do that, I just had to drill out a hole that would fit the threaded insert. In this case, it was a 1/2-inch hole. I tried to center it as best as I could, and I failed, but that's okay. So yeah, once that hole was there, I threaded in the threaded insert. My screwdriver wasn't quite big enough to do this, and I only mention that because it did mar up the threads on the end that had the notch for the screwdriver. So it didn't thread very nicely from that side. Luckily for me, I don't need the threads to go all the way. So I ended up screwing setting that side on the opposite side of where I need the screw to go. So how do I do this? So if this is the marred up side, the screw goes in on this side, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that kind of sucks, but it all worked out, and everything was low profile enough to fit within my tolerances. And yeah, on the back of the mast, you need a clamping piece. On other designs, I'd seen like just another block of wood there, but if I had a block of wood there, it would add all of this extra depth, and then the knob would be sticking out when everything was folded up. Gross. Not doing that. So I visited my in-laws to see if they had any like washers or anything I could use, and my father-in-law had this spare like piece of steel from something. I don't know. Anyways, it was perfect for this. So I hacked off a piece of it, which sucked, but just using a hacksaw sucks. But I hacked off a piece of it, drilled a hole in it, and set it up on the back, and it was low profile, and it does the job perfectly, and now it's done. It's freaking done. And I am so thrilled with the way that this thing came out. Like, I started using it almost immediately. I'm really, really eager to get some painting done, but I just wanted to be able to finish making this video and like fully get this off my plate before I move on. So yeah, I hope you liked the build. Let me know what you think of the project. I don't have plans or anything like that because I was using scrap wood and just kind of making this up as I went, but hopefully if you're giving something like this a go, this gives you some inspiration, and yeah, let me know what you think, I guess. If you thought this project was cool, consider liking and subscribing, all of that cringy YouTuber stuff, and have a lovely day.